The Senate is total unity from Susan Collins to Ted Cruz in opposition to what the new Biden administration is trying to do to this country.
So not only does that not sound like
안녕하세요. 매일매일 운동하기를 실천하고 있는 동탄 왕코입니다. 오늘은 6월 4일 금요일이죠. 어제 비가 많이 왔어요. 어제 유막 제거를 하려고 했는데 유막 제거를 못했습니다. 저희 조가 4명이 다 모이는 날이 흔치 않아요. 오늘은 비가 안 오네요. 흐리긴 하는데. 그래서 오늘도 내면 출근이어서 유막 제거를 퇴근하고 하도록 하겠습니다. 일단은 오늘 영어학원도 가는 날이어서 지금 운동하고 씻고 바로 영어학원을 가야 돼요. 지금 시간은 9시입니다. 30분 동안 운동하고 30분 씻고 출근하도록 출근이래. 영어학원 갔다가 회사 가서 점심 먹고 힘들어. 일단은 스트레칭 위주로 할게요. 요즘에 스트레칭만 해도 힘들고 그렇습니다. 역시 운동할 땐 CNN이죠. 진짜 영어를 공부를 평소에도 해야 되는데 평소에는 하기가 힘들어요. 역시 학원을 매일 가야 되는데 매일 가는 것도 힘들고, 평소에 공부를 안 할 거면은 영어 학원을 매일 가야 되는 것 같습니다. 만약에 내가 평소에도 공부를 잘 한다, 하루에 1시간씩 무조건 한다, 그러면은 학원은 일주일에 한 번 내지 2번만 가도 될 것 같아요. 근데 내가 평소에 공부를 매일매일 안 하면 학원은 차라리 매일 가는 게 나은 것 같기도 하고, 돈으로 의지를 하는 거죠. 그러다 어느 수준이 딱 넘어가는 순간에서는 학원 일주일에 2번만 가도 될 것 같은데, 영어를 이렇게 매일 하는 것도 아니고 접하는 것도 아니어서 언어를 공부한다는 건 너무 힘든 것 같습니다. 어쨌든 운동하면서 CNN.
And it appears to me that's exactly what we're going to have to do again if we're going to be successful in creating the millions of good-paying jobs that we desperately need, dealing with a dysfunctional child care and pre-K system, dealing with healthcare, dealing with higher education.
Yeah.
If we're going to stand up for working families, what we need to do is use reconciliation. And of course, we need to get rid of the filibuster.
Senator Manchin said that the Senate was never designed for one party to go it alone. And Mano also asked the senator if he was open to creating just a limited a carve out essentially to eliminate the filibuster, just to pass voting legislation on a simple majority party line vote. He said he was not, citing the concern that Republicans would use that against Democrats when they're next in power, saying what goes around comes around. Doesn't he have a point? I mean, is Manchin actually protecting Democrats for when the Republicans are in control?
I think not, Anderson. And I'll tell you something. Maybe the first test of this whole thing will not be on a reconciliation bill in order to create the millions of jobs we need and deal with so many of the infrastructure and climate issues that we have to deal with. The very first test of it may be as to whether or not we remain, for all intended purposes, a democracy. I think you are more than aware, the American people are more than aware, that in Georgia, in Texas, in states all over this country, what Republicans are doing in an absolutely shameful, disgraceful, cowardly way is making it harder for people of color, for poor people, for young people to vote. So they understand, I suspect, that their agenda of tax breaks for billionaires and cutting Social Security and Medicare and Medicaid is unpopular. So instead of addressing the real issues facing working people, they're trying to make it hard for people who might vote Democratic to vote. And what we are going to be bringing up within the next month is the For the People Act, which basically says the very radical statement that in America, if you're 18 years of age or older and a citizen, you have the right to vote. that we should not have the crazy kind of gerrymandering that we have in states around this country, and that we should not have the kind of dark money, billionaire corporate money, which is doing so much harm without disclosure. So that's what we're fighting for. I suspect we're going to get zero Republican support for that. And the only way we are going to go forward to protect American democracy, to give people in states all over this country a fair shot at electing who they want, is by passing that bill.
What do you say to the argument that, okay, you do that this time, Democrats are in control, it works for Democrats, 2 years from now, if the Republicans retake the House, retake the Senate, then they use it?
Well, that's true. That is true. But I think where we are, what comes around goes around. But I think where we are right now, when we are dealing with whether or not we remain a democracy, look, what Republicans are trying to do now all over this country is stack the deck to make it harder for people who will vote Democratic to vote. And what that means is that it is going to be very hard to have a Democratic Senate, to have a Democratic House. And I think when you're talking about fighting for basic American democracy, you got to do what you got to do. And right now, that means if we have no Republican support, doing it with 50 votes plus the vice president.
Just finally, I know you've probably heard a lot of excuses in your career in politics. Have you ever heard a lamer excuse than the Texas representative who is saying that the bill that they were pushing in Texas to move the voting time, the voting on Sundays couldn't start until 1 p.m., that was actually a Scribner's error or a typo, that they really meant 11 a.m.? And I mean, they argued it in the legislature. They were arguing this for days. Nobody picked up that it was a typo. I mean, it's insane.
Well, that is what we're dealing with now. We are dealing, but you want to go into insanity, we still have people claiming that Donald Trump won the election. In fact, this whole voter suppression is based around that big lie. So these are tough times, Anderson, and they require a tough response. We've got to pass the For the People Act. And if no Republican is prepared to support us, we've got to go it alone.
Senator Sanders, I appreciate your time. Thank you. Perspective now from CNN's chief White House correspondent, Caitlin Collins, also CNN political commentator, former senior Obama advisor Van Jones. Kaler, Senator Manchin didn't take abolishing the filibuster off the table. Essentially doesn't want to address that at all. He just says, I want to make the Senate work for the people the way it should. Manu certainly gave him multiple chances to take it off the table. He made a point not to. How do you read that?
Yeah, he didn't. Though, of course, on Capitol Hill several times he said, I don't want to get rid of the filibuster, basically stop asking me that question, but pointing to him several times saying this 60-vote threshold, is that something that you are never, ever going to support changing? And you're right, he would not commit to that, which I do think is notable. But of course, his comments essentially offering a warning about what happens if they do change it do stand. And you saw Senator Sanders there basically acknowledging it, but saying that they do feel, and this is the feeling among several prominent Democrats, that voting rights and those voting rights legislation bills that have passed the House but stalled in the Senate, they're worth it to get rid of the filibuster, even if it does come back around to haunt them if Republicans retake the majority, because they were saying when it comes to elections, that is really the basis for all of this, why we're here on Capitol Hill. And so I do think it's notable that Senator Manchin would not rule it out, but we have to keep in mind he is not the only Democratic senator who is not in favor of abolishing the filibuster. There are several others that the White House would have to get on board, that Democrats would have to get on board if that was a path that they're going to go down.
Van, what's your take? I mean, do you see some daylight there with Manchin?
Well, I was frustrated with Manchin tonight, and I think people are getting increasingly frustrated just as it becomes more and more clear to the American people what the Republicans are up to. Their behavior just seems bizarre until you put all the pieces together. What they're doing is that this so-called big lie is actually a big excuse to set up a big heist for the next election. In other words, they are 100% now committed, it seems to me, as a party to go down this dangerous pathway of making it almost impossible for the majority to rule in America. The deck is already stacked for the red states. Don't forget, the Senate already gives little bitty red states as many votes as California in the Senate. The House is already gerrymandered up the wazoo. They already stole 2 seats on the Supreme Court. The Electoral College gives red states an unfair advantage. And they have the filibuster on top of that. You already have the game stacked for you if you're Republicans, and you still want to cheat even more. And so there's going to have to be thunder on the left. You have a determined effort on the Republican Party side. I think people have been hoping that, hey, maybe we'll have a nice summer. Could we just go out and enjoy our families and not have to worry about the pandemic? I don't think we're going to get that kind of summer. I think there's going to have to be a serious mobilization among progressives to save American democracy. And Senator Manchin, I understand his intentions and I understand his heart, but at some point he's got to look at the facts and at least on the question of voting, line up with the majority of Americans who want us to remain a democratic republic. That's not where we're headed.
Caitlin, I want to play something else from Manu's interview with Senator Manchin.
Last question, Joe Biden, this week you said that you vote more with Republicans than Democrats.
I think that's taken totally out of context.
Saying he was taken out of context. Again, Senator Manchin comes from an overwhelmingly Republican state. I'm wondering what he made of his perception of that.
Well, saying that it was taken out of context, I mean, we saw the full context of that comment from President Biden. And yes, the White House did later try to walk it back, saying it wasn't a criticism, but it's hard to see how it's not a criticism when the president is saying that you're a moderate Democrat who votes more with Republicans than you do with Democrats. And we know that's not true. Sinema and Manchin do vote much more with the Democrats than they ever do with Republicans, but it was a noticeable dig because it showed the frustration that does emanate from the West Wing with people like Manchin and the way that they are involved with President Biden's agenda and how they could potentially thwart his agenda when it comes to major pieces of legislation, like what we're looking at with infrastructure, where Manchin is one of increasingly few Democrats who are saying, keep these talks with Republicans going, let's keep these negotiations happening, these counteroffers and offers. You're seeing other Democrats saying, hey, it's time to move on, and without Republican support, because clearly they're never going to agree to what we are looking to pass here.
Yeah.
And also, I think seeing the concessions that President Biden is making, there are several progressive Democrats who aren't happy with that. And so I think that's a notable part here. But saying it was taken out of context, it certainly wasn't. We all heard it for ourselves.
Yeah, Van, what do you make of the argument which Senator Manchin makes and others make, which is, look, Democrats, watch what you are fighting for, because, yes, maybe the filibuster will work, getting rid of it will work for you this time, but when Republicans take control, 2 years, 4 years, whenever it is, in the House or the Senate again, the shoe's going to be on the other foot.
Well, he's right, and we have to live with that. Look, there already are protections baked in for minority constituencies in our Constitution. The filibuster is not in the Constitution. So here's the deal. Right now, what's happened because of the abuse of the filibuster, the relentless abuse of the filibuster, when we win, we can't govern. And so at some point, why should we even try to vote? So I think we have to roll the dice. Here's why Democrats might feel a little bit more confident. We have a pathway, at least with this Republican Party, if we can have a fair election, to hold on to the presidency for a very long time. And so you don't have the filibuster, but you will have the veto. That can protect Democrats for a very long time if we can have fair elections. If you don't have fair elections, though, then the whole game is over. And so I would rather trade in the filibuster and rely on our ability to veto if we can have fair elections.
Van Jones, Caitlin Collins, I appreciate it. Thanks. Coming up next, breaking news on two related fronts. What Mike Pence just said about the insurrection that his old boss fomented, and what his old boss is now asking about, somehow returning to office this year, reporting that's just now coming in. And so is this, what intelligence officials are saying about what those Navy pilots saw that no one has been able to explain. We'll talk with one of the journalists who's just learned what's in a hotly anticipated government report.
I'm Stanley Tucci. I'm fascinated by my Italian heritage, so I'm traveling across Italy to discover how the food is as unique as the people and their past.
We're hungry, right?
I'm starving.
Come with me as I taste the flavors of the land and sea
Let's go fishing.
to discover what the food tells us about the people that craft it and its distinct regions. The maestro is making a pizza for me.
Oh, God.
That's one of the best martinis I've ever had in my life.
If you don't believe in God, you believe in tortellini. It's like a religion.
Oh, wow. This dish tells a story.
Ciao, ciao.
It has survived the darkest of times.
Actually, the best
sushi I've ever had.
A CNN original series, Stanley Tucci, Searching for Italy, premieres June 20th.
We all know that freedom is priceless, but a school for freedom is one hell of a deal. I'm Peggy Callahan. I am the co-founder and CEO of Voices for Freedom. Voices for Freedom is an anti-slavery organization. We are working in India, and we help people to freedom through a project called Schools for Freedom. It turns out that between 110 and 190 people can come to sustainable freedom over 3 years with their children being educated for a little less than $13,000 a year. In 2017, we took CNN to one of the villages we were working in Uttar Pradesh, India, and they got to see with their own eyes how the system works, how the schools work to help free people, what the conditions people are living in. They got to meet people and know them for themselves. And it really helped that they told this story. It has helped the organization explain it to lots of other people. And today, every single person they met in that village is free.
The world's biggest business stories in one place. Expert analysis from every corner of the globe. Marketplace Africa, all new Marketplace Asia and Europe. With CNNBusiness.com. Once in a generation opportunity. Technology, innovation, business.
Businesses are transforming, preparing for a future where innovation will change the way we live and work.
It's going to be, and it is, the most significant development in photovoltaics in 65 years.
It is an essential building block in providing a clean and affordable drinking water.
Explore the future of business. Go to cnn.com/business evolved in association with Vodafone Business. More breaking news now. Almost 5 months after former Vice President Mike Pence had to be hurried out of the Senate chamber with his family to safety during the January 6th Capitol riot. A day when some of the rioters were heard by those present to shout, "Hang Mike Pence," the former vice president, possible future presidential contender, took the opportunity of a speech in New Hampshire to show some distance between himself and the former president about that day.
As I said that day, January 6th was a dark day in the history of the United States Capitol. But thanks to the swift action of the Capitol Police and federal law enforcement, violence was quelled. The Capitol was secured. And that same day, we reconvened the Congress and did our duty under the Constitution and the laws of the United States. You know, President Trump and I have spoken many times since we left office. And I don't know if we'll ever see eye to eye on that day. But I will always be proud of what we accomplished for the American people over the last 4 years. I will not allow Democrats or their allies in the media to use one tragic day to discredit the aspirations of millions of Americans.
Joined now by our chief domestic correspondent, Jim Acosta, who covered the previous administration. CNN's chief White House correspondent, Caitlin Collins, is back with us. Jim, it's interesting. There wasn't applause when the vice president had the line, we went back and we did our duty. The applause was backing the, I'm not going to let it, basically make me turn against the president. I'm so proud of what we did for the 4 years. What else did the vice president have to say?
Well, Anderson, he was also talking about how he supports some of these what they call election integrity efforts on the state level across the country. Those are code words for essentially trying to fix the next election cycle for Republicans, because Republicans, by and large, have been driving this process at the state house level. Anderson, one of the things that Mike Pence did not talk about during that speech, he did not talk about how his own president tried to strong arm him into overturning the election results. The disagreement that exists over January 6th is not just about January 6th. It is about what led up to January 6th and how Donald Trump for days was, and weeks really, trying to overturn the results of the election, calling various state officials and so on, and then trying to strong arm his own vice president into going down to the Capitol and overturning the election results. And so the vice president, the former vice president there, is just glossing over what happened around January 6th. And it's unfortunate to see. Obviously, he wants to put that behind him because he thinks it's beneficial to him to get right with President Trump, former President Trump, for the 2024 cycle.
Yeah, Caitlin, one wonders how long it's going to be before he makes a pilgrimage to Mar-a-Lago for, the same Kevin McCarthy photo op with the former president.
Though I think it's even worse for Pence to say something like that, to try to really minimize that day with his comments, because he was the one where they were chanting about hanging him. The rioters carrying Trump's flags, wearing shirts bearing his name. And so it's stunning for Pence to make these comments. It's not surprising, of course. This is a long-held pattern that we've seen allies of the president take. Lindsey Graham, who Trump gave out his number one time at a press conference, of course, he is a close ally of the former president. Ben Carson, Trump once called him a liar. Marco Rubio, Ted Cruz. I mean, the list goes on and on. But I think Mike Pence is really the height of it, because, of course, the situation he was in, where he never got a phone call from the president that day when they were in office, the vice president never getting a phone call from him, as rioters were chanting, "Hang Mike Pence," something that was well known on that day. And of course, he had to be escorted out by service. His staff was greatly concerned about this. Staff here at the White House were begging the president to put out a statement, and to hear him minimize it as just one tragic day and essentially blaming Democrats and the media for continuing to talk about it, even though it was a history-making moment, just goes to show what this next race is going to look like in the Republican primary coming up, because of course you're going to see people like Pence, who we do expect to run, trying to square this while saying, they're not standing by what Trump did that day, but they are saying we need to move on from it. That is the words that you've heard from Mitch McConnell and those who voted against the January 6th commission, saying let's put this in the rearview mirror. And I think it's going to be a really difficult balance for them to try to maintain going forward, because of course we know what Trump expects, and that's no criticism at all.
Yeah, I mean, Jim, the former vice president's wife and daughters, if my memory serves me correctly, were there with him that day and scurried to safety. I mean, the idea that he now, in order to run, and to remain in good standing in the Republican Party, has to kind of recreate or reinvent, his feelings about that or what actually happened that day is pretty sad. I know, speaking of the former president, you have some new reporting on what he's been saying to some of his closest advisors.
We've been talking about this for a couple of days, Anderson, this idea that Donald Trump has been out there talking to advisors about whether or not he could be reinstalled as president of the United States. We were able to confirm it here at CNN. I talked to a Trump advisor earlier today, a source familiar with these conversations, who said Trump has been going around and asking his advisors, what do you think of this theory, referring to these far-fetched suggestions coming from far-right celebrities, people like Mike Lindell, who owns the MyPillow company and so on, and wondering whether or not he could somehow be reinstalled as president of the United States if somehow these election results are overturned. This crazy notion that the election results might be overturned in Arizona or wherever. And according to this source familiar with these conversations, these advisors have had to talk Donald Trump off the ledge. And in the words of the source that I spoke with earlier today, this talk coming from the former president is, quote, very dangerous. And so, Anderson, we can write this stuff off as, Trump just, he's just talking out of his back end and so on. He does this on a regular basis. It's this kind of nonsense and craziness that sparked the insurrection on January 6th. And it sounds like Donald Trump is so starved for attention, so starved for coverage, that he's willing to stoke this once again. And the unfortunate thing is there are just so many millions of Americans who believe this craziness, even though it's just that.
Yeah, Jim Acosta, Caitlin Collins, thank you. Next, the government still can't explain what Navy pilots saw in the sky. They've just come to perhaps the biggest single conclusion they can about these unexplained aerial phenomena. The new reporting when we come back.
That's delicious. You have to taste that.
Of London, and this is CNN.
Across Africa, businesses are working together like never before. All new on CNN, Connecting Africa.
Join me, Eleni Jaka, as we crisscross the continent to show you how new connections are revolutionizing commerce in Africa. This month, Connecting Africa through the automotive sector.
If you increase your intra-African trade by 3% per annum, you can double that in 5 years.
All new Saturday on CNN in association with Afrexim Bank.
Tuesday, President Obama talks fatherhood, leadership, and legacy.
Are you going back to community organizing?
With Anderson Cooper, Barack Obama on fatherhood, leadership, and legacy. Tuesday on CNN.
Cases are still going up. This virus has enormous capabilities of spreading like wildfire. When you see something that you know is wrong, you call the police. I didn't call 911. States need help. Federal